Today in the EU, how German parties plan to win voters.
Die SPD hat ein ganz klares Programm für die Zukunft, wie es besser wird für unser Land, was wir tun können, damit die Bürgerinnen und Bürger eine gute Zukunft haben.
Germany's political groups have officially launched their campaign trail and unveiled their party platform ahead of February's snap election. From their manifestos, both the Social Democrats and the Conservatives appear to be carefully calibrating their messaging on key citizen concerns. Their goal, to win over voters without shutting the door on future coalition deals. But which alliances stand a real chance? And what's the strategy behind the slogans? Hello and welcome. I'm Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. Today, I'm joined in the studio by Euractiv's reporters in Berlin, Nick Alipour and Jasper Steinlein. Hello, both.
Hello, Giada. Good morning, Giada.
So this week in Germany, political parties have presented their campaign platforms, and you both attended the reveal of different manifestos. How was it? What was the atmosphere like?
I attended the presentation of Germany's SPD, so the Social Democrats manifesto, and I'd say the presentation was more or less calm and collected. They made it fit into one single hour, including journalist questions.
Mm-hmm.
They were promising the most digital campaigning ever, and all they came up with were QR codes on flyers and QR codes on posters that are supposed to go up in the streets. They're centering their campaign around respect, which is a bit of a curious framing, at least for the start we've had.
Nick, would you say that the atmosphere was calm over at CDU?
Well, calm is perhaps not the right word to describe it. I think the CDU presentation had more the vibe of the coronation, even though obviously the leader of the CDU had already been crowned as the leader in this campaign. But it was all very ceremonial. They went actually off location. I'm now outside the venue here where the CDU will finally present its manifesto. In the center of Berlin, nice, classy hotel. You do sort of sense that this is the future Chancellor that is presenting his ideas. There he is. He's entering the room, accompanied by cameras and, as usual, a lot of security. Behind him is his loyal Bavarian sidekick, Markus Söder, ready to take the stage. Looks a bit like a TV studio. One thing they are really good at is staging a good spectacle.
Ja, meine Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen hier im Alten Telegrafenamt in Berlin. Wir haben gerade in einer gemeinsamen Sitzung der beiden Parteivorstände, der CDU und der CSU, einstimmig unser Wahlprogramm für die
So, there was really a sense of like the party getting ready and preparing to take the crown, which they are currently on track to do in the upcoming election in Germany as they're leading the polls.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the upcoming election in next February, I think it's important we take a step back, maybe for our listeners that haven't been following closely what has happened in Germany, since there have been a number of developments in the context of the political crisis. Can you give me a short recap?
This week was really the sort of like the next step in that process that Scholz set in motion last month when he dismissed the finance minister and his government coalition fell apart.
Germany's three-party coalition has collapsed after ministers from the Free Democrats quit the government, likely paving the way for early elections next year. Their exit comes after German Chancellor Olaf Scholz sacked his finance minister. He said Christian Lindner, who leads the Free Democrats, had broken his trust too often, making serious government work impossible.
So it was very much an interesting thing if you read international media and they sort of like all commented, Scholz loses vote of confidence. That is actually what happened on Tuesday. Very much the German way of a government breaking down, very stable, very orderly. So before you can call new elections, as would happen after a government breakdown, in Germany you have to ask a vote of confidence. And that is what Scholz did this week, and it was long planned ahead. That sort of went as expected, and he didn't get the majorities that he needed, meaning now the process that follows can actually lead to early elections, including the president dissolving the parliament And that would be the step that comes next.
Well, isn't it curious that the German way, indeed, to break up a coalition or to break up a government is setting up a vote of confidence and then hoping that you will lose it, which is what happened for Scholz. And yet he's pitching himself as to be the next chancellor. And building on your wording of coronation, Nick, I'm also very much under the impression that CDU, CSU feels they're already in office. The general tone, the general vibe of their election campaign is they feel they've already taken over. We're now under a conservative government. And this leaves SPD in a position, like ever since the government and the coalition breaking apart in November, it leaves SPD in a position of hoping for the best, trying to reassert themselves of, by the way, we are still in office and we're not going anywhere. But yeah, to throw in a millennial pop culture quote here, a king that has to state himself as the king. Can he be a true king? Can he be a true king? So this is very much the vibe I got yesterday. Scholz had to restate that we are still in office, and under SPD's majority, this wouldn't have happened, which is quite curious because SPD just was in office, and it's a bit unfortunate and a bit strange, I feel, to blame everything that went wrong within the coalition now on the two minor coalition partners and saying that it would not have happened on a SPD-dominated government, given that they are now at currently 15% and will not be, or most likely, who knows, most likely not be the majority or the leading coalition partner in a future government coalition.
And in light of this waning consensus, did you see any differences in the election program compared to what you expected or compared to what had been promised beforehand?
So I suppose for the CDU, there was a sense that it was quite understated when it came to security, the manifesto. In fact, those were questions that were being asked, obviously, because the CDU has really branded itself for a long time while it was in a position as this sort of, hawkish force that is going to be very tough on Russia and that's really driving the Chancellor to get tougher on Russia himself and is not supporting Ukraine enough. Well, when we look at the manifesto, it was all not too different, actually, from what the SPD could say, with some nuances, obviously. But any kind of extreme demands that we have previously heard from the mouth of the leader, Friedrich Merz, such as supporting very vocally that Ukraine will join NATO after the end of the conflict, that didn't make it into the manifesto. Saying that Ukraine has to win rather than that it cannot lose, as the Chancellor likes to say, that also didn't make it to the manifesto. And neither did the delivery of Taurus missiles, long-range missiles, a massive debate in Germany, very divisive issue that the CDU has long come to support on the side of delivering Taurus to Ukraine, also didn't make it. So you can see, really sense that this manifesto was a no mistakes manifesto. Really, we want to be a force of change, but not so much change that people are scared of voting for us.
Indeed, Ukraine is a thorny topic in the election campaign, one the CDU-CSU has been very outspoken about. So how do you interpret the change in nuance? Is it because the party is afraid of losing voters to more extreme groups like AfD and BSW, who's been vocal about reducing aid to Ukraine?
It is a question I've asked many people at this point because it is a fair question and it can very much be linked, in fact, to the Eastern German situation where you have a strong force of sentiment that feels slightly closer to Russia than Western Germans do, and that also has a general proclivity to judge anything that comes to that relates to arms and military buildups and so forth, and delivering weapons. So we've seen actually the rise of, as you mentioned, the far-right Alternative for Germany party and the Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht, the BSW, in Eastern Germany for probably those reasons. And the CDU has had to form coalitions with those parties in those areas. And their representatives there have indeed toned down their rhetoric quite a bit because of that. And it's not wrong to say that some of that has probably reverberated back to the national level and led also Friedrich Merz to be cautious, because there are votes to gain in the East and not too many to lose as well. But also overall in the population, the sort of more hesitant and, as he would say, calm course of the Chancellor has its supporters. And if you're already at the level of about 30% plus, as the CDU is, and you basically only have to do the election and grab your prize, you'll be very careful not to mess up. That doesn't mean that Friedrich Merz will behave that way in office as well. But it means right now he's really keen not to make any mistakes.
Mm-hmm. And Jasper, where does the SPD stand on weapon delivery and security guarantees to Ukraine?
Actually, I'd like to build on the former of the surprises or not being any surprises in the manifestos.
Mm-hmm.
Reading through both manifestos, I feel like there were no major surprises on any side. In SPD's regard, perhaps because Olaf Scholz is not even trying to pitch himself as the Chancellor of surprises, but rather he keeps echoing and restating and reiterating his key talking points, which is very much the core of his campaign, and his stance on Ukraine, and especially on the potential delivery of long-range missiles like Taurus technology, is unchanged. And he drove that point home yesterday just as well. They were holding their manifesto presentation at their headquarters of Willy Brandt House, and there's this huge statue of Willy Brandt, who is the embodiment of a changed Eastern policy, more or less pointing at the stage with his hand. So it could be hard to imagine that Olaf Scholz would be changing his stance on the Eastern policy of SPD just right in this moment. Anyway, where does SPD stand on these things? In particular, it feels like the name of Olaf Scholz is tied to the denial of a potential supply of long-range missiles like Taurus to Ukraine, because curiously, in the manifesto, specifically, they say under SPD government, Germany will be at Ukraine's side as long as necessary. Germany is the biggest supporter, both in terms of military and civilian aid, and Olaf Scholz is taking care of this conflict not escalating in a direct conflict between NATO and Russia, which, mind you, is already the Russian state wording for the active conflict that we're having. Like in the Kremlin's mindset, this is what's happening already. So essentially, from an SPD point of view, the civilian and the military aid will have to suffice. They want to enable Ukraine to enter peace negotiations on eye level. And CDU-CSU, so the conservatives with their main candidate Friedrich Merz, have a more pointed view on this, which is also in their manifesto. And it says, if Ukraine falls, the threat for other European nations to become attacked or to become invaded becomes immediate.
Yes.
Merz has made it no secret that he would be in favor of delivering Taurus to Ukraine, and also that he sees some common ground even with the Green Party, curiously, in this regard, because both our Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock and our Economy Minister Robert Habeck, who's also the Vice Chancellor in office, would be in favor of deploying it.
Mm-hmm. I want to now move to another important point of this campaign, which is the economy. The economic state of the country is part of what put Scholz in trouble in the first place. Germany is stalling and the government collapsed over the breach of the debt rule. So what do two parties have in store to get the country out of the crisis?
So the big sort of pitch that the CDU is making is we're going to completely free you businesses from state intervention. That's sort of the idea. If as long as you let business do what business needs to do, things will naturally just go back to growth. That's sort of the big pitch that Friedrich Merz is making. Sounding actually sometimes a bit like Javier Milei, the Argentinian president, which is curious because he's very much strongly condemned him during the campaign. But that's sort of the vibe, especially at the European side of things, to free businesses from over-regulation. One of the headline proposals is to slash corporate tax. I mean, Germany's corporate tax among the major European economies is somewhat high. It's about 30% on average. That is now supposed to fall to 25% if it comes to Friedrich Merz. Some have accused him as well of wishful thinking because some of his proposals actually don't seem to be so very well funded, and that's obviously a big question mark as well. Also, slashing benefits, social benefits, is a massive part of his proposal. So you see, really, that's a package of, like, as long as the state pulls out, and we can save some money with on social spending, and we can give businesses room to grow, we will just get back to health without us even really doing anything.
I mean, that's interesting because I was just listening to a podcast on Argentina that explained how, indeed, thanks to Milei's economic policy, the country's economy is flourishing in some respects. Its inflation is reducing, but at the same time, 53% of the country is experiencing poverty because big government and welfare was what was keeping large parts of the population afloat.
Yeah, and that is interesting that you say that, because in fact that's the pitch that Olaf Scholz is making as well, and he's branding Friedrich Merz as this force of a social disruption who will just take it all from the poor and give it to the rich.
I think they're both trying to make it into a fight or a battle of core convictions, so to say. Like the point that SPD was trying to drive home yesterday at the presentation, also in their manifesto, is that employment creates prosperity. Essentially, like if our citizens are roofed, housed, well-fed, and occupied, then the economy will start rising again, and it will become prosperous because everybody's happy and feels in a position to work hard. And CDU is under the impression that there needs to be less public spending, given the old rule of thumb that if you do not have money in the first place, don't keep spending any of it. So I think it's both sides. It's both sides coming from different angles, but essentially trying to do the same. Both agree, for example, that lowering the cost of energy and the cost of electricity plays a key part in helping the economy get back on track again. They're just divided on how to accomplish it.
This, I think, has led to the campaign actually becoming quite personal, and both sides sort of branding themselves as the dark side mutually. I think it's unusual for a German campaign how much personal attacks there have already been at this stage. So that was a big thing yesterday where Friedrich Merz accused Olaf Scholz of being mainly an inappropriate person, not up to the gravity and gravitas of the office. And meanwhile, Olaf Scholz was accusing Friedrich Merz of lying. So how many times the name Friedrich Merz came up in some of the position papers that the SPD has issued? It's just striking. So it's really not just about the manifesto content here. It's about them sort of like building each other up as the ultimate enemy, and more so than that's normal, I'd say, in Germany's more consensual politics style. Everything's really reasonable, very calm. To the extent that that's possible for Germany, we're kind of getting off that path at the moment.
Yeah, I think so far a lot of it is just campaign noise, and we will cut down a part of it, and then when we enter negotiations, we might be surprised by what comes out of it. For example, it's interesting that SPD has centered their campaign around respect, but Olaf Scholz is not always in tune or not always the one to find the right words when addressing his political adversaries, or even within his own realms, and then accusing the other ones of even a lack of moral maturity, which is another stab at the former coalition partner of FDP.
Mm-hmm. And so, because tensions are running high, what coalitions could lead to a lasting government, which is the next step we're looking at for 2025?
The most likely coalition to come out of it could be what was a former grand coalition of the former two major parties. Now, SPD is no longer one of the two major parties in Germany, but is only placed third in public opinions polls. So AfD, Alternative for Germany, so the right-wing party, is in second place. No Democratic Party deems them a worthy coalition partner, so they are most likely going to be left out of a future government. So a possible outcome could be CDU-CSU, the Conservatives, either entering a coalition with the Social Democrats, with Olaf Scholz, who already signaled that he would not be keen to be a vice-chancellor or not a chancellor at all.
Yeah, a demotion.
Or the Green Party, which has never happened on a federal level before, but has happened several times on a state level within Germany.
Nick, what's your take?
The thing is just that the CDU is sort of, or at least part of the CDU, are sort of really also building up the Greens as the enemy during this campaign. So it's sometimes a bit hard to imagine how they would eventually walk back on that. That's, why the Grand Coalition is probably the most likely outcome at the moment. You might think that some of this is also a bit of like, good cop, bad cop playing, because the Greens have sort of during this government been associated with some measures that many conservative voters found outrageous regulation, green policies, to an extent that they were not used to. And you might think that the CDU is indeed trying to get their own voters on the side so that they don't have to fear that the CDU will go together with the Greens after the election and completely wreck all its promises. But to the extent that you do that during the campaign, it will be a lot harder to sell such a coalition afterwards, even though you might now just be campaigning. So indeed, now everything is geared in terms of just the logic of the campaign towards a grand coalition with the Social Democrats.
And we will keep following the developments. Thank you, Jasper and Nick.
Thank you.
This was Euractiv's podcast, Today in the EU. Sound design by Miriam Sáenz de Tejada and Niels de Keukelaere. Research and production by Charles Cohen. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news and sign up for our newsletters. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite streaming platforms. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. It will really help us spread the word about our work. See you tomorrow. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.